George Keller, former assistant dean of Columbia College, came a step closer to the revolutionary, anarchistic essence of the New Left when he wrote in the book review section of the Washington Post of 19 May 1968. During the fourth day of the revolution at Columbia University, where I work and where a small group of 400 students and outside collaborators, seized by idealism, Maoism, racial concerns, thuggery, spring fever, religious fanaticism, guerrilla warfare, and the romance and poetry of movement, grabbed control of the campus, a colleague turned to me and asked, "Why is it that so many of the young revolutionaries in our time feel that the universities are the principal lever for smashing the system?" I hadn't slept more than 8 hours in those 4 days, and I was quite groggy, but the question rocked me. Certainly, Marx or Lenin would have snickered at the notion of starting a revolution to transform society by taking over a school, an ivy-colored retreat without guns, power, or money. End quote. I recently read a package of documents released by the CIA in 2005 that describes the New Left and Herbert Marcuse's influence on radical college campus activism in the 1960s. The collection of documents includes press articles published by well-known sources like the New York Times and the Washington Post, published in the 60s with identified authors, and it also includes short essays and reports on New Left ideology, strategy, and tactics, none of which have authors or publishers listed, so I'm not sure if they were drafted by the CIA itself or some other person or agency. What I do know is that these articles and reports reveal that none of what we are witnessing on college campuses today is new. And I don't mean, college kids have always been a wild, idealistic bunch with too little real-world experience and too much time on their hands. I mean that what we're witnessing on college campuses today, the protests springing up seemingly out of nowhere and across the country, are still seized by Marxism, still seized by Maoism, still seized by Marcuse. They are still seized by idealism, thuggery, spring fever, religious fanaticism, guerrilla warfare, and the romance and poetry of communist movement. There was a saying that rang throughout the universities during the student protests of the 60s, and that saying still echoes on college campuses today. Marx the God, Marcuse his prophet, and Mao his sword. Quote, "The New Left is a radical movement, often influenced by Marxist and neo-Marxist doctrines, comprised of a small minority of militant, highly intelligent university students and some older intellectuals, primarily in the more fully developed and powerful industrial countries of the free world. Its adherents have become disaffected with, alienated from the establishment, understood roughly as the dominant political, social, and economic institutions of the countries concerned, foremost among which are the United States, Germany, France, England, and Italy. The New Left has adopted a number of heroes, but the most often mentioned names are Marx, Mao, Marcuse. From Marx, to whose early humanistic leanings they are apparently attracted, they derive their admiration of socialism, which they, like other modern admirers of Marx, consider has been distorted in the USSR into an oppressive, bureaucratic colossus, a caricature of what Marx intended. In Mao, they seem to admire the Puritan revolutionary, who has created the violent Red Guard to destroy those elements of Chinese communist society which seek to bureaucratize the revolution. As in Mao, the New Leftists see also in Castro and Che Guevara model revolutionaries appealing to the romantic sense of the New Left. End quote. Today I'm going to talk about the 60s student protests, broadly speaking. I'm also going to talk about Marx, Mao, and Marcuse. I'm going to read from the package of documents that I found titled The New Left that the CIA released in 2005. I'm going to argue that one can't understand what's really going on college campuses today, like the ongoing protests at Columbia, NYU, Harvard, and many other places, without understanding the essence of the revolutionary elements of the 60s protests, because what's happening today is essentially no different. Marx is still the god, Marcuse is still his prophet, and Mao is still his sword. The issue at hand, Palestine or divestment from Israel, doesn't matter at all, because the issue isn't the issue for communists. The issue is always the revolution, which is why so many of the images springing out of these protests are filled with the hammer and sickle. We're going to discuss how Marcuse repackaged Marxism for a Western audience. We're going to discuss the students that find themselves in the middle of the revolution. We'll discuss, to the question that rocked George Keller, why the revolutionaries choose college campuses as a vehicle for smashing the system. We'll also talk about what the New Left is and why the New Left turned academic left in the 70s and 80s, turned woke left in the 90s through today, is extremely dangerous because their grandfather taught them that the end justifies the violent means. I'll say ahead of time that the topics we're going to cover today could each justify multi-part podcasts as standalone items. My goal isn't to cover everything that needs to be said about Marcuse, or everything that can be said about how much of the 60s student protests were seized by communism. My goal is for you to walk away knowing one thing. The protests you're seeing on college campuses today are seized by communism, just as many of the 60s protests were. If you cling on to anything more than that, we'll chalk it up as a huge win. If you look around you, your average person is bewildered right now. The protests on campuses are confusing a lot of people. How did college kids become so anti-Semitic? How did our colleges become so radicalized? What are we going to do about all of this? What's the right move? All of these are important questions, but I would argue that without taking these questions into consideration within the context that what we are witnessing is communist agitation and revolutionary activism, we cannot begin to entertain answers. Everything changes once you realize you are dealing with a communist. Okay, I want to start by talking about the people protesting on campuses in the 60s and today, the students themselves. One thing we must remember throughout our discussion today is that many of the students protesting on campus in the 60s and today are themselves victims of communist psychological warfare. They were and are victims of communist propaganda, agitation, political warfare, and brainwashing. Communists target college kids because it is in this population that you find a deadly combination: radical idealism and tremendous ignorance. There was a video posted on X I saw yesterday where a girl with a nose ring was asked, "Why are you here protesting?" She couldn't answer the question. She had no idea why she found herself in the middle of one of these radical protests on college campuses. And it wasn't, I'm not answering that because I'm nervous, or I'm not answering that because go F yourself. She was clearly being honest. She was clearly caught off guard and realized on camera for the first time that she didn't know why or how she ended up where she was. In other words, she was a victim. I would argue that most of the kids at these protests are victims, led by highly organized, well-funded, revolutionary radicals with aims and ambitions that have essentially nothing to do with the issues they claim to be protesting. This is no different from the 60s, as this document from the CIA suggests. Quote, "Some of the factors underlying student behavior have been described above, and while the analysis leans heavily on American experience, it applies to a considerable extent to university settings in other parts of the world where student violence has erupted. Within this diffuse student activity, small, loosely organized groups in some countries consciously pursue wide revolutionary aims, with a single-minded dedication somehow reminiscent of the prototype of Lenin's professional revolutionary, or of the classic portrayal of the complete revolutionary in Dostoevsky's novel The Obsessed. This small group is the motive force of the New Left, and it has succeeded on a number of occasions in sweeping into its revolutionary action the large multitude of students who before and after involvement had deep misgivings as to the value of such action." End quote. The kids on campus today think they are demanding divestment from Israel. They think they are protesting war. Some have no idea what they're doing because they have been socially and emotionally manipulated and groomed into being foot soldiers for the revolution, just like the multitudes of students who thought they were protesting the war in Vietnam, or thought they were advocating for civil rights when, in reality, they were swept into an attempted communist cultural revolution. College kids are extremely idealistic and ignorant, which makes them easy prey for highly organized groups that consciously pursue revolutionary aims with a single-minded dedication reminiscent of the prototype of Lenin's professional revolutionary. Let's linger on this for a second, because this is a very important point that very smart people keep missing. Most of these kids are victims and have no idea what's really going on. When you see a massive protest on campus with thousands of students, know that what you're seeing isn't a spontaneous and organic process. It's manufactured. It's what experts in cult psychology like Robert J. Lifton call planned spontaneity. The protest appears organic, but it's not. Appears spontaneous, but it's not. The spontaneity is planned, and it's meant to trick unsuspecting people into thinking they are joining a spontaneous movement. Trick them into thinking they are just going with the flow, getting a piece of the energy and excitement of the current cultural shift, getting a piece of history. College kids don't yet know how the world works. Their brains quite literally are not fully developed. Their idealism and ignorance can prove deadly. There are very good reasons why we tell our youth not to do many things. For instance, don't go out and advocate for communism. Don't try communism. It will not work this time. It doesn't work. We have millions and millions of dead bodies that pay testament to warnings and lessons written in blood. From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Sounds awesome when you know nothing about how the world works and you want to sit on your ass and make art all day. Art that you feel should be worth tons of money and adulation, of course. Idealism fades when ignorance contacts reality. In the meantime, idealism can range from interesting to annoying to sand in the gears to entirely destructive. Here's an analogy I've used before that most people grasp right away. If you're at the age where you have a lot of work experience, you know that new hires can generate a lot of anxiety, especially idealistic new hires. Even if the new hire knows a lot about your industry, they don't know a lot about how your company operates in that industry. So they have a million idealistic new ideas about why you should be doing this or that, not knowing that you have already considered most of these options and have chosen to do things the way you do for varying good reasons. The debates have been hashed. The trial and error is done. You do things the way you do because you have been in contact with reality. The idealistic new hire hasn't. And it may be funny at first, explaining why the new hire's idea has been tried and why it failed spectacularly. It may even be amusing for a while. Yeah, we tried that. Boy, do I have a story for you. At some point, however, it becomes annoying. And if it continues, it eventually starts clogging the gears in your operation. You don't have time to rehash the history of your company's decisions. You need the employee to do things the way you tell them to do it because you live in the reality of your business. If the idealism keeps up, it becomes a huge liability. Now, many new hires quickly grow out of this phase and start to discern what will actually be an idea worth forwarding. Through constant contact with reality, they get a clearer picture of the way the world and your company work and can start providing beneficial solutions to actual problems. You start to pay attention to their questions. You start to really listen when they have a great idea. You promote them for bringing your company more into alignment with the reality of your business. But college campuses are completely different, because on college campuses, there is little room for contact with reality, which means there are few places to drop the ignorance and therefore idealism. I know I'm generalizing a lot here, but the point is college kids are a population that is off on their own for the first time and looking at the world as a ball of infinite possibility. They don't know what they don't know. They may do a lot of learning, maybe learning how to be activists, surely, but until they can take that learning and connect it to reality, they remain pretty dumb, and therefore highly susceptible to psychological warfare, thought reform, and brainwashing. Their idealism is easily hijacked because they are about to step into the world, and they don't want to step in shit. And who could blame them? They don't understand why things are the way they are, and it's easy to sell them on the idea that everything is awful. Easy to tell them that they had no hand in choosing to be born into this miserable world as it is. A world where they have to pay bills and take responsibility for themselves. They had no agency in deciding to organize things in this way or that. No ability to make decisions about the situation they're walking into. They've never had a seat at the table. Who drew these borders? Why do I have to work? Why is it that the U.S. Constitution allows for free speech even when that speech is hateful and hurts my feelings? Why is the individual propped up at the expense of the community? Why isn't healthcare, food, and housing free? Everyone needs those things. Why do some groups have different outcomes than others? We're all equal, so we should expect equal outcomes. Why can't everyone have equal outcomes? Whose science are we listening to? Why is there inequality when we're totally smart enough to decide we can force everyone to be equal, dude? Who made these laws that I didn't agree to? Why can't we just print more money? It's easy to sell young and impressionable youth on the idea that the world is shit and it's up to them to change it. They can decide for themselves what world they want to live in. They can transcend the past. Past people, past ideas, past practices, past laws, past injustices, and start their lives on their own terms, unencumbered by what Karl Marx called, quote, the tradition of all dead generations that weighs like a nightmare on the brains of the living, end quote. While reading this collection of documents, I found a passage that perfectly captures the sentiment of many university students, both in the 60s and today. Quote, to cite the well-known American student leader of demonstrations, Mario Savio, from his essay, An End of History. American society is a bleak scene, but it is all a lot of us have to look forward to. Society provides no challenge. American society is the standard conception it has for itself is simply no longer exciting. The most exciting things going on in America today are movements to change America. The futures and careers for which American students now prepare are for the most part intellectual and moral wastelands. This chrome-plated consumer paradise would have us grow up to be well-behaved children. End quote. That quote is taken from Mario Savio's An End of History from December of 1964. Mario Savio was a prominent leader of the New Left student protest movement who could merit considerable attention, but I mention him in passing, as this collection of documents does, to draw attention to one of his chief arguments, an argument that captured the imagination, idealism, and ignorance of his fellow students and more. Mario Savio was obsessed with the idea that people were trying to tell him that history has ended, that the world he would inherit was already decided on. He was possessed by the spirit of Marxist doctrine, which is that history is driven by conflict, and only when everyone looks around and there is no conflict to be had can we say that history has ended. Only when we have perfectly humanized the world and remember ourselves to be God can we close the final chapter. Mario was one of these hyper-idealistic young people who was upset that he was born into the world as it is. Upset that the tradition of all dead generations weighed like a nightmare on his brain. Now, I drew this conclusion because I've read Marx and spotted Marx in the essence of Mario's cited passage immediately. But I was curious and did some digging to see if Mario ever quoted Marx's 18th Brumaire directly, and I quickly found a speech he gave just a couple of years before his death in 1996. And in that speech, Savio says, quote, "Why was it important to define one's position with respect to Marx? First of all, because Marx is a poet. Even when I was very young, I heard, I remembered, I could not forget. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. It could come out of the Bible, it is so beautiful. And someone says, it did come out of the Bible, and of course, Marx must have known his Bible. Those are burning words. Those words are in my soul. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And one other thing, again, Marx as poet, burning words that remain in my soul, from the opening passage of the 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon. People will remember these words, and I may have mangled them somewhat, and someone will correct me. The experience of all the dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brains of the living. There's more, but that's the poetry. That's Marx rising to a pitch of poetry which is unusual in political writers, because he's not a political writer. He's a religious one. That's my addition. I want to repeat it. It's so beautiful. I may have mangled it, but it's in essence that the experience of all the dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brain of the living. So it's not hard to be attracted to Marx if you have even a little feeling for poetry." End quote. When George Keller was talking about the romance and poetry of movement, this is what he meant. Now, this quote is taken from Mario's speech, Why I'm Not a Marxist, one in which he details all of the reasons why he should be considered a Marxist and was always most definitely a Marxist. But that could be its own podcast for a different time. For those that are interested, Mario specifically says he's a liberation theologian. So, totally not a Marxist. And again, we see that George Keller nailed it when he said the movement was captured by religious zeal. The students of the 60s were idealistic and ignorant, a deadly combination that made and makes them supremely susceptible to falling for communist thought reform, propaganda, and political warfare. The students protesting in the 60s were completely sold on the idea that they were living in a world they didn't choose to live in. Sold on the idea that they didn't get their shot at moving history, but they could and should take the initiative to change the world and mold it to their image. What Henry Giroux once called the prophetic vision of social justice. For the core of the New Left, students like Mario Savio, Tom Hayden, Stokely Carmichael, and Abby Hoffman, the goal wasn't really to win a series of battles from within an established socio-political order. End the war in Vietnam, for example. The goal was to completely revolutionize the socio-political order, to end all wars, all imperialism, all racism, all sexism, all violence, all inequality, and it all in communism. Now, like I said earlier, most of the protesters certainly didn't know that they were signing up to progress history forward as Marx would understand it. Many students found their way to protest because they had legitimate grievances, real issues with racism, real issues with sexism, real issues with the war in Vietnam. But communists are very good at seeking out and targeting groups of people with legitimate grievances, subverting those groups, and making the issue the revolution, as the documents we're discussing suggest. Bear with me for this longer passage, but it's an important point that helps us add context and flavor to our discussion. Quote, using legitimate student grievances as a point of departure, the New Left resorts deliberately to illegal, violent means, anarchistic in intent, and typically seeks to provoke counter-violence by the police in order to demonstrate dramatically the brutality of the establishment. Its anarchistic bent extends towards its own movement, so that it typically avoids firm organization, formal leadership, or administrative organs. While it has no visible international organization, happenings at one university, thanks to the efficiency of modern mass communications, become quickly known to all universities, having a radical student segment, and in turn stimulate and encourage imitative action. A form of international liaison is maintained by frequent international travel of leading student New Leftists. Some prominent student New Left leaders are known to have visited North Vietnam, Communist China, and Cuba, certainly for inspiration and very possibly for instruction, moral, and material support. The progress of the more extensive student riots has made it self-evident that the original demands for educational, administrative reforms from which the demonstrations are started very quickly become vehicles for quite different goals. In some cases, it has been unequivocally clear that the true aim of the New Left leaders is total discrediting of all authority by total disruption of law and order. If the leaders succeed in this on campuses, they then seek to spread the chaos to the larger community beyond, with the ultimate aim of total revolution. Spokesmen for the New Left typically aver that they have no positive program beyond a vague kind of socialism, and typically respond to questions as to what they wish in place of the university organization they are trying to destroy, that they do not have anything specific in mind. Their business, they say, is to tear down the old institutions, not to build new ones. End quote. For the New Left, the core group of revolutionaries that hijacked legitimate grievances and reoriented it for their own purposes, Vietnam wasn't the issue. Civil rights wasn't the issue. Free speech wasn't the issue. The issue was always the revolution, a complete teardown of the world as it is and as it has been to reveal utopia from under the rubble. A project to cast down whatever reality they didn't like, to force a new reality on the world. Why not? Why not? They scream. You've had your time. It's our time now. That was the sentiment, a sentiment they found in the religious doctrine of Marxism, a sentiment sold to them by Marx's prophet, Herbert Marcuse. Quote, Herbert Marcuse is a German-born American philosopher teaching at the University of California, San Diego. He is regarded as the philosopher of the New Left. Briefly, his thesis is that modern society has become a kind of technological administrative dictatorship of modern industrialism, which, like other dictatorships, controls the populations, but more pleasantly by providing prosperity in material comfort. These, however, prevent the victims from developing their talents and qualities as individual and unique personalities to the fullest, so that they have become one-dimensional man. Thus, the proletariat, Marx's historic instrument of revolution, has been bribed away from its revolutionary impulse, which is now inherited by the intellectual, the student. End quote. I'm going to turn now to a tweet I recently posted on X after discovering the documents we're drawing from and quoting today. This tweet was the catalyst of this podcast, and I think it does a good job laying out, succinctly, Marcuse's influence on the New Left, along with bringing in Mao for a discussion we'll soon launch into about Mao's tactics. Here's the tweet, which, again, draws heavily from the collection of documents we're discussing. In June of 1968, the current digest of the Soviet press released a scathing article calling University of California San Diego professor Herbert Marcuse a false prophet. As a Soviet publication, the current digest set out to annihilate Marcuse's decommunized Marxism, and for obvious reasons. Marcuse had abandoned vulgar Marxism, an old interpretation of Marxist doctrine, and the USSR's bureaucratic and administrative terror, in favor of his new personal flavor of faith, identity Marxism. Now, we could really get lost in the weeds here, but the TLDR version of Marcuse's theory goes like this. Free market economies stabilize the working class. Marx predicted the working class would necessarily enter into open revolt against the system once their economic and material conditions became too brutal to bear. Once workers became too immiserated, too miserable, they would rattle the sabers and bring on the bloodshed. This, Marx argued, was a scientific prediction, predicated on what activists now call the immortal science of Marxism. In other words, just as you can predict the apple will fall if you let go of it, Marxists predicted capitalism would inevitably fall after running its course in advanced industrial societies. It was only a matter of time. But by the 1950s and 60s, it was clear that free market economies improved the lives of workers. The revolution wasn't going to come from advanced industrial states driven by a free market. As a matter of fact, it seemed only to come in the largely agrarian societies like Russia and China, precisely the places Marx said it wouldn't. Marxists admitted this reluctantly. They had a crisis of faith. The immortal science of Marxism was clearly wrong, both on a moral level, as revealed by all of the starving and dead people, and on an economic one, as revealed by workers buying nice cars and taking their families on holidays. Because of this revelation, Marcuse theorized that the working class must mostly be abandoned as first movers in a communist revolution. The working class was too stable, and revolutions required instability to work. So, he argued, Marxists must place their energy in college kids, ghetto populations, criminal aliens, and anyone else who might feel marginalized by society, such as gays and lesbians, Black Americans, the unemployed, the poor, and war veterans. If you can radicalize these groups and centralize their grievances, Marcuse thought, then you can build a coalition that can break the working class from the inside. As the New York Times would publish in the wake of Marcuse's death in 1979, quote, Dr. Marcuse had little belief that the working class would, in affluent, highly technological societies, incite revolution. Rather, he believed a new coalition of student radicals, small numbers of intellectuals, urban blacks, and people from underdeveloped nations could overthrow forces that he saw as keeping workers from an awareness of their oppression. End quote. And for more information on this important point, read An Essay on Liberation, which was written by Marcuse in 1969, something I would argue is essential reading for our current moment. The current digest was responding to the meteoric rise of Marcuse and his new theory of Marxism when it published Marcuse, False Prophet of Decommunized Marxism in June of 1968. Marcuse and his vociferous disciples scared the USSR because they had been converted to a new faith, a new interpretation of Marxism that has special gods, and challenged the USSR's stranglehold on Marxist doctrine. Quote, Marcuse, 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 the name of this 70-year-old German-American philosopher, which has emerged from the darkness of obscurity, has been endlessly repeated in the Western press. In Bonn, the name is pronounced Marcuse. In New York, Marcuse. In Paris, Marcuse. The California resident who has undertaken to disprove Marxism is being publicized as if he were a movie star, and his books as if they were the latest brand of toothpaste or razor blades. A clever publicity formula has even been thought up. The 3 M's: Marx, the God, Marcuse, his prophet, and Mao, his sword. End quote. Marx remained the God, but Marcuse was his latest prophet, and the USSR hated his interpretations of their shared doctrine. If Marcuse spent his life in dark obscurity, his prophecy, identity-based Marxism rather than economic Marxism as the lever of revolution, wouldn't have bothered the USSR. But Marcuse had reached astronomical popularity in the tumultuous 60s, and, worst of all, he had adopted the revolutionary strategies of Chairman Mao Tse-tung, founder of the People's Republic of China. Mao's formula of cultural revolution proved to be incredibly successful in a gigantic, mostly agrarian society that was the last place Marx would have predicted communist revolutions to take hold. His strategy was straightforward: radicalize the easily brainwashed students and use them as a lever to bulldoze everything and consolidate Mao's power. Kids are extremely idealistic and have few defense mechanisms for fighting off the totalizing nature of thought reform, as Robert J. Lifton, expert on cult psychology broadly, and Mao's system specifically, might describe it. In an interview with Pierre Vincent-Ponty, I have no clue. Yeah. It is what it is. In Paris of 1969, Marcuse said that, quote, "Certainly today every Marxist who is not a communist of strict obedience is a Maoist," end quote. Marcuse was very familiar with Mao's Marxism-Leninism with Chinese characteristics, and, according to the Current Digest, a central focus of Marcuse's revolutionary strategy was precisely what Mao had accomplished in China with his Red Guards. Quote, "Marcuse replaces the class struggle in present-day society by the generational conflict. Flattering the students, he assures them that they are the chief revolutionary force, since, as Novel Observer wrote in his summarizing of their doctrine, they are young and reject the society of their elders. Therefore, young people in general must struggle against adults in general, everywhere and anywhere," end quote. And additionally, quote, "It is characteristic that his interpretation of prophetic revelation for the uninitiated invariably coincides with the practice of Mao Zedong's group. And what is of the greatest significance is that although this group does not stint on abusive language aimed at the imperialists, the governments of the capitalist states have very tolerant attitudes towards dissemination of its ideas, and at the same time toward the activities of Marcuse and his vociferous disciples as well," end quote. What you are seeing on college campuses today is nothing new. If you are curious enough to take the initiative to investigate what's happening, you will find that Karl Marx is still the god, Marcuse is still his prophet, and Mao is still his sword. There is a reason these kids and their enablers and directors all sound like communists. They are. It's just that they are pushing for communism in a way that Western audiences are more susceptible to. The form of rebellion you are witnessing isn't vulgar. It's not the vulgar kind you may be familiar with. It is a new kind, one that Marcuse said is, quote, "very different from the revolution at previous stages of history, because this opposition is directed against the totality of a well-functioning, prosperous society, a protest against its form, the commodity form of men and things, against the imposition of false values and a false morality," end quote. For today's communists, the issue isn't the issue. The issue is always the revolution. Make no mistake, the majority of the college kids revolting on campus have no idea what they are doing. They are in a cult, one with Marx at the top, the doctrinal revelation of Herbert Marcuse in the middle, and Mao's revolutionary strategy at the ground level. This already happened in the 60s, but we put an end to it. The doctrine is now evolved, updating Marcuse's prophecies through a woke lens, what is technically called critical constructivism, by the way, but it's all the same strategy. Evergreen State College was the canary in the coal mine. This might be our last warning. Okay, that's the end of the tweet. Herbert Marcuse updated Marxism to work on a Western audience. The economic arguments weren't working, so he found fruitful sites of critique that might. Race, ethnicity, sex, and imperialism. The communists couldn't get the workers' revolution they wanted. And more, by this point they were admitting that capitalism provided the good life. They admitted that capitalism provided the goods, and they hated that. They hated that people were doing well. They hated that life was stable. How can you break a stable society? You can't, and they knew this. If you're going to get your revolution, you need instability. You manufacture and introduce chaos, infiltrating legitimate grievances and reorienting disaffected people towards total revolution. You trick people into thinking that they're protesting a single issue about a specific point when, in reality, that issue doesn't matter a damn. The only issue is the total revolution. Marcuse and his ilk provided the theory. the how the world should work, to ignorant and idealistic college kids. Marcuse's theory targets college kids intentionally because getting the college kids is the central pillar of the Gramscian strategy and what Rudi Dutschke called the long march through the institutions. You get the colleges, and everything else follows. Mao Zedong provided the revolutionary ground strategy, and it is in the combination of this new theory of Marxism, this updated religious cult doctrine, and this new theory of revolutionary political warfare and activism that we find both the university students of the 60s and today trapped in. Most of them don't have a clue why they are there, and the chaos and uncertainty and confusion are intentional. The kids are being handled like pawns by communists that know what they are doing, because the communists have studied Marx, Mao, and Marcuse. Quote, during the June riots of students in France, a statement by Charles Auguste Bardin, again, pronunciation, no clue. A 20-year-old student participant in the riots, cited in the New York Times of 13 June 1968, can be taken as representative and as a confirmation of how far beyond mere educational reform the New Left students are aiming. In any revolution, there must be an immediate, well-known enemy for everyone to hate, and in our revolution, it is the French police. Every bomb we make and throw, every paving stone we tear up, means the revolution goes on another day. Our aim is to destroy the government and to change our society, but we fight the police to remind France of who we are and what we want. End quote. Can you think of an enemy the woke left have chosen to focus on in our current moment to distract everyone from the fact that what they're really after is total revolution? If you can't, talk to a Jewish friend. They might have an idea. Israel is the current chosen target of our communist revolutionaries. The communists have chosen their target, have chosen what is called their mass line. They are spreading disinformation and propaganda, setting up covert operations, debating on contrived terms, deliberately driving chaos and confusion, and astroturfing. In short, they are taking what are called active measures. They directly confront and engage their targets, namely university administrations and their administrators, seeking immediate goals which ultimately boil down to destroying something and giving themselves more power and influence, either politically, culturally, or materially, otherwise known as taking direct action. These terms, mass-lined, active measures, and direct actions, must be understood, because they are the primary revolutionary ground strategy the woke left inherited from Chairman Mao, the same guy who radicalized students to cement his own revolution in China, one that ultimately claimed the lives of millions and millions of people. How does this work? Communists pick the cause they are pretending to care about, the mass line, which in this case is the conflict in Israel, or divestment from Israel, as they say. The people running the show don't really care about this issue, or at least don't necessarily need to. The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. The real target is the Constitution and the current socio-economic political order, because those things uphold the singular thing that all of Marxism is designed to abolish and destroy, the individual. Whatever form of Marxism you're talking about, the goal is to kill the individual and witness their rebirth into the collective, always. Think of the mass line as a road the communists construct to funnel the masses of college students or anyone else who might fall for the deception into direct confrontation with the communist chosen target, a way to kill the individual and meat grind them into the collective sledgehammer. Their road needs travelers, so active measures are deployed to brainwash people, primarily through social and emotional carrots and sticks, into stepping onto the path that leads to the target. The goal is to use covert operations, shady funding, astroturfed and completely manufactured support, political and cyber warfare, and whatever propaganda and disinformation is necessary to radicalize people and get them into the mass line, Once the road is full and the radicalized mass is moving, communists agitate, using what is called beautiful trouble, to place their targets into decision dilemmas and fool them into taking action that can be propagandized to garner popular support for the communists, thus bringing a critical mass of people into the mass line. You try to get the cops to overreact, or you try to get a counter-protester to do something stupid. You try and get your enemy to react in such a way that their reaction can be sold as proof of the brutality of the establishment, as proof of your supposed moral superiority, as proof of your totally legitimate protest and need for accommodation, support, funding, and power. None of this is new, and it's important that we understand that it's not new so we can fight back, so we can identify the mass line, the active measures, and the direct actions. If we don't accurately identify those communist tactics, discerning between legitimate protest and deception, we will fall into traps, which is precisely what is happening now. The right is entertaining the idea of banning hateful speech on campuses now. Are you fucking kidding me? The left has been banning speech and killing the individual for years. For years, the right has been saying that free speech is under attack by the left. Guess what? They were right. Now, they haven't accurately assessed the situation, and they themselves are calling for banning speech and therefore killing the individual. In other words, the left is getting the right to do its work for it. In the end, we all lose, because both sides are attempting to ban speech and kill the individual. Both sides are attempting to limit what belief people can have and ban our tongues from moving in ways that offend them. This is utter madness. It's dialectical political warfare, a much broader topic that I'm not diving into today, but I highly suggest searching for dialectical political warfare on New Discourses to hear a must-hear talk presented by Dr. James Lindsay on the topic. It's absolutely must-hear material. What's important here is that if the right had any sense at all, it would know that the ground it has chosen to fight on has been chosen in advance by the enemy. It would know not to fall into the obvious trap, but the right doesn't yet understand that they are dealing with Marxists, Maoists, and Marcusians. Marcusians. I don't know. We're going with it. The right hasn't read An Essay on Liberation, hasn't read Marcuse's One-Dimensional Man, and hasn't read Marcuse's Repressive Tolerance. If they did, they would have known that they could use the moral position and popular support they had to end campus speech codes and the DEI bureaucracy once and for all. They would learn from the lessons of the last 60 years and see that the protests are manufactured and fake, designed to level attacks against rights enshrined in the Constitution, rights that enshrine individual liberty, the very thing communists want to destroy most. If they could discern what's actually happening with these protests, the right would know that the issue isn't the issue. The issue is the revolution. Quote, "The new left's license for violence is found partly in Marcuse's prescription of intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left, and from his idea that the right of resistance to this new dictatorship may be extended to the point of subversion." The following citation from his essay, Repressive Tolerance, is enlightening. And this is where we cite Marcuse's Repressive Tolerance. "But I believe that there is a natural right of resistance for oppressed and overpowered minorities to use extra legal means if the legal ones have proved to be inadequate. Law and order are always and everywhere the law and order that protect the established hierarchy. It is nonsensical to invoke the absolute authority of this law and order against those who suffer from it and struggle against it, not for personal advantages and revenge, but for their share of humanity. There is no other judge over them than the constituted authorities, the police, in their own judgment. If they use violence, they do not start a new chain of violence, but try to break an established one. Since they will be punished, they know the risk, And when they are willing to take it, no third person, and least of all the educator and intellectual, has the right to preach them abstention." End quote. Everyone needs to start understanding that the Cultural Revolution is in full swing. And history tells us that the Cultural Revolution leads to chaos, destabilization, violence, and death. The Summer of Love had essentially nothing to do with George Floyd. That was the start of the Cultural Revolution. And how violent and destabilizing did that get? We've known the left's strategy since the 60s. Break society by capturing the colleges, radicalizing the students, and setting them loose on society to go break everything else. The strategy is to extend what Marcuse called liberating tolerance to all those that would wield a sledgehammer. And there are plenty to wield sledgehammers. The academic left captured the universities in the 60s during the critical turn in education. So for 60 years, the institution that is most responsible for certifying the U.S. workforce has been brainwashing idealistic and ignorant college kids to be Marxists. Where did all the radicals learn to practice critical race theory? Where did they learn what post-colonialism meant? Where did they find out they have a gender soul? If anything, we are in a much worse position today than in the 60s, because today Marxism masks itself as a million new causes, and essentially no one realizes that they're dealing with communists anymore. We have zero understanding of communism in this country. No one knows what it is anymore. And more than that, it's worse because the kids don't have to wait until college to get brainwashed. They're getting it out of the womb. It's just culturally relevant teaching. It's just restorative justice. It's just social and emotional learning. It's just the same old shit repackaged to work in the West, a place that doesn't understand communism or Marxism in the slightest. George Keller was rocked by the question, why is it that so many of the young revolutionaries in our time feel that the universities are the principal lever for smashing the system? The universities certify the future, George. The universities are flush with cash. The universities have been given too much power. The universities are the most obvious place a radical would identify to smash the system. And the universities now teach students that Marx is their God, Marcuse is his prophet, and Mao is his sword. What would we do differently if everyone knew this? How would our university system change? What reform might we demand in K-12 education knowing what we now know? What culture would we build to give confused kids an off-ramp so all that's left in the mass line is a mass of idiots with no political sway whatsoever? What would we each do differently in our daily lives if we all accurately discerned the problem that we're facing? These are some of the questions we must answer. These are the questions that should rock us all out of our slumber. The time for being George Keller is over. The issue isn't the issue. The issue is always the revolution.